Caution: it is highly recommended that you have seen Training Tape and Intermission before viewing this video. You can find the link to those two videos in the description below.
You've delivered urgent documents, overnight packages, emergency supplies, but somehow this delivery seems more important.
Analog horror is a genre where nostalgia meets dread. It combines familiar media with unsettling content that turns everyday formats, like VHS tapes or emergency broadcasts, into sites of terror. Often hosted on social media platforms like YouTube or Twitter, analog horror has seen a huge rise in popularity since the early 2010s, and is often the main topic of countless video essays. But what makes analog horror work so well? What causes this surge in interest for grainy VHS tapes and distorted overlays? What makes it resonate so deeply with audiences? Today, I'm examining two of my analog horror films through the lens of this question. The first is Training Tape, a visual documentation briefing personnel about a new anomalous threat. The second, Intermission, depicts a hijacked broadcast where the plans of these anomalous threats are slowly revealed. By comparing my films with influential analog horror series like the Mandela Catalog, Gemini Home Entertainment, and Local 58, I'll explore the genre's defining elements, my creative choices, and how these choices either align with or diverge from the genre standards. Analog horror takes elements of found footage horror, but expands them by incorporating elements of broadcast television and dated analog technology. These narratives benefit from a familiar low-fidelity format that leads a sense of authenticity and realism, as well as historical relevance, drawing from the era of VHS tapes and analog media. For analog horror to be effective, certain core elements are essential. For me, three elements immediately comes to mind. First is authenticity. It must feel as if it could be a genuine piece of lost media. This is often achieved by creating a sense of age through degraded footage, static interference, and the distinctive aesthetic of analog technology. This would be the first thing you notice when starting up an analog horror piece. It pulls the viewer in with intrigue and curiosity. On surface value, these elements may seem like they are actively working against the visual clarity of the medium. However, it is this lack of transparency that gives the genre its feeling of insecurity and authenticity. Second is brevity and tension. Analog horror works best in short bursts, often lasting between 4 to 5 minutes per episode. Each moment is densely packed with unsettling details. The build-up is subtle, relying on ambiguity rather than explicit scares to sustain audience engagement. Third, successful analog horror relies on the psychology of fear, which is our instinctive reaction to distortions in familiar formats. As Noel Carroll argues in The Philosophy of Horror, horror succeeds when it disrupts the known world with elements that elicit confusion and a suspicion of reality, creating a state where the viewer is cued to the potential of the extraordinary. In analog horror, this effect is achieved by introducing glitches, distorted voices, and interrupted transmissions, all of which suggests that something has gone totally wrong. These elements are compounded and lay the groundwork for an unsettling atmosphere and ultimately what many people would consider a scary experience. Now, to my 2 analog horror videos. Both Training Tape and Intermission were heavily inspired by The Thing, a creature from the movie of the same name by John Carpenter, with the power to mimic human appearances and behavior to the point that it is indistinguishable from another human being. I have taken the time to receive feedback from a number of viewers and compiled them, along with my own research into the genre, to review my work in a somewhat more objective lens than before. Conclusively, the first video, Training Tape, successfully taps into the analog horror's core themes: paranoia, mistrust of institution, and the fragility of human identity. The choices to style it as a training tape resonates with The Thing's theme of unseen threat within the group. According to the feedback, the editing and sounds were effective and that the video was authentic and convincing. "It looks legit, and the concept's good," said one reviewer. This authenticity aligns with what F News magazine described as analog horror's unique power to reframe the familiar into something frightening. By using the format of a CIA training video, the film invites viewers to suspend disbelief, allowing the audience to feel as if they are being drawn into a world where this anomalous threat actually exists. This approach also reflects Carol Clover's idea of horror as a reflection of societal fears, particularly the fear of uncontrollable threats infiltrating even the most secure spaces. Furthermore, the concept is reinforced by strong visual and auditory choices. The low-fidelity, degraded aesthetic mirrors the Mandela Catalog style, where broadcast interruptions and official-looking footage adds a layer of authority, only to be undermined by anomalies that signal danger ahead. Despite its strength, the CIA training tape also revealed some shortcomings. The AI-generated voiceover, while authentic, was described as grating and overused, detracting from the tension.
Attention! The content of this video is strictly classified. By viewing it, you are now bound by strict confidentiality and operational security protocols.
More significantly, feedback highlighted pacing issues, noting that the video was too long and that there was too much information to take in all at once. One viewer put it bluntly, "It's like a chore to watch." This criticism is consistent with what Carroll calls the paradox of horror, where the audience must be kept at the edge of suspense without overstaying its welcome. Analog horror traditionally relies on brief, intense experiences that don't allow the viewer time to fully process what they've seen. In comparison, my video's extended length of 10 whole minutes diluted the tension rather than intensifying it. Successful analog horror, like Local 58 or Gemini Home Entertainment, carefully balances suspense and brevity, often layering new details or plot twists every few seconds. Horror's effectiveness often lies in its ability to keep viewers engaged without overwhelming them, maintaining a rhythm that oscillates between quiet dread and unsettling revelations. My video, in contrast, missed the opportunities to introduce more visual or auditory anomalies, which would have broken up the pacing and added complexity to the narrative in a more effective way. The second video, Intermission, builds on a grand concept: mimic creatures calling for their species to merge into a larger, monstrous entity in the ocean. This idea aligns well with themes in cosmic horror, where human lives are trivialized in the face of unfathomable entities, an approach popularized by authors like H.P. Lovecraft. However, similar to the first video, feedback indicated that the pacing and engagement needed improvement. As Local 58 and Gemini Home Entertainment demonstrate, analog horror often excelled by presenting information through implied horror rather than direct exposition. Viewers are left to fill in the blanks, creating a sense of unease as they piece together fragments of horrifying pictures. In my broadcast video, however, long stretches without new visuals or auditory elements disrupted the tension. The lack of varied stimuli meant that the audience's emotional engagement waned as they weren't presented with enough stimuli to sustain fear or intrigue. Despite these challenges, both films showcase potential for innovation within analog horror, particularly through their blending of cosmic horror and body horror. Their greatest strength, while mildly unoriginal, was that they were inspired by The Thing. The notion of a shapeshifting creature asked the viewer the question, what if something could mimic us so perfectly that it erases our identity in the process? Analog horror, while typically focused on psychological horror, rarely incorporates cosmic or body horror elements, making this an interesting fusion. In the Mandela catalog, the horror is rooted in identity loss, but my film extends this concept to a species-wide threat, suggesting that human existence itself could be consumed and be formed by these creatures. This aligns with ecological dread explored in Monstrous Nature, where horror more reflects the human's anxiety about being outmatched by a larger force than a force that came from within. By applying this cosmic scope, the broadcast video introduces new possibilities for analog horror to explore larger existential threats rather than isolated scares. So, after all the discussions and analysis, where do my films stand? I drew the conclusion that they excel in terms of concept and authenticity. The use of familiar analog formats gives the film a convincing veneer, while the cosmic and body horror themes offer fresh takes within the genre. However, there are major issues with length and lack of narrative shifts that detracts from the tension and immersion, which makes the end product struggle to keep the viewers engaged. Looking forward, I might try to make my videos have a much shorter runtime, or ensure that something visually or audibly engaging happens in intervals. Horror, however, is entirely subjective, and rigid approaches to designing a horror experience almost never end with a satisfactory end product. By balancing horror elements with traditional fundamentals in storytelling, I hope to refine my approach to analog horror and create another experience that will be even more terrifying and haunting than the first.